Moving up to E tier, at the bottom of E tier we have glue. Yeah, you might have been surprised to not see this in F. It is very close to F. But, okay, I might be slightly biased here. I love glue. Glue is one of my favourite tiles of all time, and I hate to see it done like this. However, I do genuinely believe, having used glue, that it is more useful than the wizard and the bomb shooter. That isn't saying much, but I do think it's more useful than those. Just for the simple fact that I do find that a lot of these off-meta loadouts struggle against spaced whites. Round 5 is really early to be able to send them. And at the very least, corrosive glue deals with spaced whites well as group balloons if you have glue splatter. So, at the very least, Glue Gunner is a decent early game defense tower that also helps you slow balloons, and also has Moab Glue, one of the best slowdowns for Moabs available in the game. Now that being said, why is glue bad? Because that is basically all it has. There is almost nothing else about glue that is useful in battles. Now, the reason why I still want to put it in E is what I just said is kind of the general opinion. I do think there are some things which people generally expect aren't relevant that I actually think will be good for Glue Gunner in battles, just not good enough to carry it out of E tier. Now, those upgrades are mostly the top path upgrades, mostly Balloon Solver, because you will be surprised how often you'll die to just ceramics in this game, especially when they start ramping up. I did have a kind of embarrassing game a bit ago on docks where, well, I was forced onto docks. I didn't want a long map, but my opponent skipped to it, and I'd already used my skip. And I was really not in the mood to play like a stupid game like that, and I'm like, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to throw this game. If this guy wants docks, I'll give him docks, and so I ran Ninja Dartling Sniper. Not really happy about that, but I did. And I thought I would absolutely destroy this guy. And I mean, I nearly did. He sent me a fortified bad on round 31. I just got my Mad up, I got my Sticky Bombs up, I got my Shinobis up, I got my Cripple Moab up, and I'm like, pfft, this is pathetic. Nah, it's not even going to get anywhere. I'm just going to destroy this thing. And I did destroy the bad layer really quickly, and then the ceramics just ran straight through. I literally popped all the Moabs, all the Zongs, all the DDTs, and the bad layer, but then just the ceramics got through. They actually made it like really, really far without popping and actually killed me. So, I actually think that Balloon Solver could be useful as a good way to deal with grouped up to fortified Moabs. Because by the way, if you hadn't used Balloon Solver much, it can kill Moabs, and probably fortified modes as well, pretty quickly. Not sure about anything more than that. BFBs, it kind of starts to struggle, but considering how easy it is for Balloon Solver to hit every single balloon on the screen with its acid, yeah, I think that is still very worthwhile. So yeah, I think Balloon Solver is a relevant counter to Super Ceramics, and I think it will be decent at dealing with group Moabs, which means that I think that it's not an irrelevant upgrade in terms of the meta, but that doesn't say much. It's still probably one of the worst towers in the game. I also want to try and give some credit to Middle Path, but I'm not sure if I could say that, to be honest. Like, the Middle Path ability does temporarily increase the damage that balloons take from everything that hits them, while the glue effect is, well, there. Which is a really powerful ability. I mean, you've already seen Cripple Mob is an amazing upgrade against the bad. Super Brittle is one of the, combined with Tax Zone, is an amazing combo for popping bads. So you would think that this would be good too, but I think it's just that it's not as much of an increase as the other two options, and it's cheaper than the other two options, but the downside of that is it's not something you can always apply, and I think that makes it a bit exploitable. So yeah, considering it's temporary, considering it's a lot to spend on just that effect, and it's not going to be there all the time, I feel like the Middle Path might drop off, even though it's definitely at least worth bringing, I guess, but like, it's not great. The only other thing I guess I would have to mention is Super Glue, which I do think is an underrated upgrade. Super Glue is a very, very powerful 5th tier, but there's just one reason why it's never used really, and that's because Icicle Impale exists, and Icicle Impale does almost the same thing, and it costs less. Now, Icicle Impale doesn't quite slow them as much as Super Glue does, but that doesn't really matter much when it comes to how much cheaper it is, and the fact that Icicle Impale still slows them to a ridiculously slow speed. So, you know, it kind of just gets outclassed by Icicle Impale. But if you're running a loadout in battles where you can't run ice, then you can use Super Glue as a stand-in for Icicle Impale. The only problem is, of course, bad damage, but I mean, I don't think you're running Glue Gunner for bad damage. I suppose that is one way in which its Middle Path might make up for the rest of its failings, because technically Middle Path ability is good against bads because of the same Super Brittle Tax Zone combo reason, but eh. I also forgot to mention in the initial recording a bug which causes glue to become much worse than it should be. In all honesty, I could genuinely see glue being D tier, at least, if it weren't for the fact that there is a bug in the game currently where the glue gunner tries to glue balloons it's already glued. Now, I heard about this bug, and to me it sounded as if it didn't actually go for balloons that had already glued, but it just, if it happened to shoot a balloon it had already glued while aiming at another one, it would use up its PS to re-glue that balloon. But no, it's just as bad as described. Not only will it waste PS on balloons it's already glued, but yes, on top of that, it will actually target balloons it's already glued. I didn't think this bug was that bad at first. It definitely affected how good it was, but the first few games I used glue, I got pretty lucky and it basically never screwed me over. Once I unlocked glue hose though, especially when using glue hose with corrosive glue, which I thought would be a really powerful mid-game defense option, I found that actually, because of this bug, glue hose almost never targets what you need it to and wastes all its time spraying the same balloon with lots of glue when it already is glued. This bug is absolutely detrimental to the glue gunner, and honestly, I see people saying how could NK even release battles in a state like this sometimes with all the bugs, and a lot of them I at least think, well, come on guys, they're understandable. Like, they're annoying, yes, but like, some of them do require a lot of setup, some of them are quite elaborate. I don't think all the bugs are particularly awful. But then I think this glue gunner bug is just inexcusable. The tower's practically unusable with this bug, and they definitely knew it was there. It's not hard to spot. That being said, this bug isn't as bad on Moab glue, which is the best upgrade you can get for glue, so it at least has that going for it. Anyway, then there's the Ace. The Ace is another tower that we see considered pretty trash in battles. I'm not going to say that's outright wrong, but I do think it has some combos that are overlooked. Definitely not enough to pull it out of E tier, but enough to say that I don't think it's an absolute F tier tower that you shouldn't be using. So the main use of Ace I see is Ace with Alchemist, using Never Miss targeting. If you didn't know, is an amazing cost-efficient defense. If you didn't realise, Alchemist buff, when it wears out, depends. You'll either run out after a certain amount of time. The time changes depending on whether it's 3rd tier or 4th tier, and depending on whether you took the middle path or the bottom path, cross path. But yeah, it will take either a certain amount of time for the buff to wear off, or if before that amount of time passes, the tower manages to fire off a certain amount of shots, it will run out then as well. That's to balance things out, because obviously otherwise Alchemist buff would always be best on Super Monkeys if it just lasted for like 5 seconds, because in 5 seconds a Super Monkey can fire a lot more shots than a Dart Monkey. But anyway, despite that fact, there are still some towers that take buffs better than others, because any tower that shoots multiple bullets at once only counts as one shot. Now you might notice that Never Miss shoots quite a few darts at once, and they all count as just one shot for the Alchemist. As well as that, it technically doesn't shoot very fast, but it just shoots a lot of things at once each time, that all don't miss, because, you know, Never Miss. So that means that Alchemist pairs super well with it, because the buff will last the maximum amount of time, the darts will all deal 2 damage with their massive PS, and also get +1 PS, and also be able to pop leads, and you'll be able to keep multiple of them buffed at the same time with a single Alchemist without having to get many upgrades for it. So that seems like a very efficient combo that people might be overlooking, and I was almost tempted to put it in D tier for that. But I think the only problem with that combo is it definitely isn't as effective with Spectre because of how fast Spectre attacks, which eats up the buff really quickly. And if you don't upgrade to Spectre, the Never Miss may be really good against normal balloons, but not so good against Moabs. So this is really only an early mid-game option, which kind of restricts its potential. Now aside from that, I do think Fighter Plane is slightly underrated. It's a very cheap upgrade that gives some extra Moab damage that can help you deal with grouped Moabs or fortified Moabs in a very cost-efficient way near the start of the game. I think that it's slightly underrated, not super underrated, because admittedly the Moab damage isn't that impressive, but it's enough to get through early Moabs, and it's very, very cheap for that cost, like for what it does. And of course there's just Operation Dartstorm and Sky Shredder, which have always been very reliable 4th tiers and 5th tiers respectively for just general all-around damage at a very low price that hits everywhere on the screen, that you can also of course cross-path to make C camo, and you can also give out buffs to let pop lead. Finally, there is the middle path, which is in a weird state at the moment, to be honest. You see, Bomber Ace is technically a really powerful upgrade if you didn't realise. Each one of those bombs, and it drops 4 every single time, does 10 layers worth of damage with its explosions to everything it hits, which means that's 40 damage at once, which is already enough to take a fifth of the health of the Moab off, let alone Super Ceramics, which will just be deleted by the explosions. So that sounds really powerful for an upgrade that costs less than 1,000, but you probably already know the only reason why this isn't actually as strong as it sounds, because of course the bombs miss all the time. Now, if those bombs could be made to hit more consistently, that would make Middle Path Ace a lot better. But that's a very map-dependent thing, and I haven't really seen that take off yet. I've been trying, I don't think it's going to work out. There might be maps added in future that make it good, but for now, I have to say, although Bomber Ace has potential, I don't think it's going to be reliable enough to be actually relevant.
Hey, so a little update on that. Bomber Ace spam is actually kind of viable. I did try Bomber Aces a little, but I assumed that you would only be using 1 or 2. I thought if you started spamming more than that, while it would give you more consistency, I thought it just wouldn't be worth the money. However, it does look like it's actually a half-decent defense, which might not sound like a real strategy even if it is a good defense, but if you combine that then with actually having the Ground Zero upgrade unlocked, it sounds like a very effective way to bridge yourself over to Ground Zero, and then if you get multiple Ground Zeros on the map, then you're going to be pretty secure if you get rushed. This is what I mean when I say that Ace has some potential. It really might make a comeback. At the same time though, you do have to really spam these. And even once you have spammed them, you're not really foolproof. Because although you can pop lead and see camo, you can't pop blacks with the bombs. And blacks are the kind of thing you can easily rush someone with.
But other than that, there is there's the 4th and 5th tiers of the Middle Path, which not only improve the damage of the bombs even more, but also give it its ability, of course, Ground Zero. Now, Ground Zero was probably the most powerful ability in the game, maybe, in Battles 1, because it could be activated instantly, and if you were ever in a situation where you felt like you were about to die, as long as you'd saved up enough money, you could just sell all your towers and then just go Ground Zero, ability, sell, Ground Zero, ability, sell, and keep doing that until you're safe. And that was an amazing way to counter rushes. But in this game, of course, a lot of abilities have an initial cooldown to prevent people from being able to do that, and Ground Zero is one of them, which apparently is going to be revoked in the next update, and they're going to make it so it's actually instant now, but that's not yet. Now, that being said, I think despite that fact, Ground Zero is still somewhat going to be useful. It is still something that generally just kind of nukes the whole screen. It's a very good panic button that will keep you alive. Considering how powerful it is, I don't even think like over 10,000 is that expensive an amount to pay for it. It is extremely good at defending almost every type of rush except a single gigantic balloon like a bad. So I do think that Middle Path is going to be a decent option, especially once it's been, like, you know, updated so that it has the instant cooldown, but for now obviously it just feels a little bit bad because it used to be so much better in Battles 1, but I don't think that means the upgrade is bad, it's just not as broken as it was before. Still, of course, that means it's not carrying the tower. The only thing really left to mention about Ace that I haven't mentioned is Flying Fortress, which I know people would expect that I would just instantly laugh at that upgrade and be like, you're never gonna get it, way too expensive, pathetic. But I will actually say this, it is a lot easier to get stupid expensive 5th tiers in battles because of how much money you can make from eco. As well as that, a lot of stupid expensive 5th tiers are cheaper in battles. I mean, as you saw, the mag is only 60,000, that's a good deal to be honest. So I do think you will be able to afford Flying Fortress if you play it greedy enough, and I do think that's somewhat viable. Why do I not think that makes Ace decent? I think the problem is, even if you can afford it, yes, it is technically really powerful, but I think that Flying Fortress is one of the most overpriced upgrades in the game. Not only is it really expensive, but even though it's a very powerful tower, it's not quite over 100,000 worth of money, like, powerful. It's not that good. Which means that, although you do have viable late game, I don't think you have the best late game with Ace. I think that's what Ace is really supposed to be, a late game tower, but I feel like it just doesn't fit that criteria right now. I think that it just seems like a tower that can deal with the mid game quite well and then drops off pretty hard. So if it could deal with the late game better, I could put it higher, and it feels like that's how it's supposed to be. But right now this is just a good mid game tower and not really good anywhere else. And then finally for E tier, we have the Heli pilot. So I was very tempted to rank the Heli pilot below the Ace because of how many potential ways I could see the Ace could become better. But I do have to be talking about how things are right now. And I have to admit, I do think Heli has more potential than the Ace right now to be good. but only a little bit more. Mostly just because of Downdraft, which is an upgrade I don't use much, so I often forget how good it is, but it is a very good way to save yourself against Super Ceramics with good micro. As well as that, of course, it has the Apache, which makes it deal really good all-round damage, up map-wide, and has the option to be cross-path to see camo, can obviously pop leads. It's just generally a really good, cost-efficient, damage everywhere on the screen, no real weaknesses tower. Now, that is almost all I have to say about the Heli though, which is kind of weird because of how many unique upgrades it has, but I think the biggest thing that's hurting the Heli is its bottom path. Now, I loved the Heli's bottom path when BTD 6 first came out. I remember just getting Moab shoves every single game. But of course, then they got nerfed when Comanche defense was actually one of the most overpowered towers in the game, and ever since, the bottom path's never really been as good, but I still like the bottom path. In Battles 2, though, I think the bottom path is going to be awful. Mostly because the bottom path may slow down Moabs, but of course its weakness is, it's best at dealing with just a single Moab balloon. If the opponent sends multiple, then you're going to struggle to push them all back. Well, if the opponent can see you have a Moab shove, they're not just going to send one fortified BFB or something and then let you store it in place forever. They're going to be like, oh, you have a Moab shove. Guess I'll just spam Moabs at you instead, and you can only push one back at a time, and so it's going to overwhelm you. It's just one of those towers. There are some towers that technically have good upgrades in BTD 6, but they won't carry over as well to Battles 2, because your opponent could just see that you have them, and they'll have an obvious weakness, where in BTD 6 that weakness won't be exploited. In BTD 6, Moab Shove is great, because you get one Moab on round 40, you get like 2 on round 50, you can massively delay having to buy Moab defense by getting a single Moab Shove, because it can genuinely infinitely stall Moabs for multiple rounds. But when your opponent can just send Moabs and BFBs whenever they want, and any amount of them as long as they can save enough money, yeah, they're just going to send enough that you can't stall with it. It's not really very useful at that point. So the only other relevant upgrade to talk about then, I guess, would be, of course, the middle path's later upgrades, Support Chinook, and, I actually forgot, Special Poperations, that was the name of it. Don't use that tower much. I don't think most people do, to be honest. Now, the Chinook, it could have some uses. I can confirm that Spirit of the Forest ability, giving you lives, can go over 150 lives, so I imagine Chinook does the same. And if that's the case, you can use that as a tiebreaker. If you both have a defense that's going to defend every single round, and you're going to go to round 40, and you're like, oh no, I'm going to lose the game because I lost lives at the start and my opponent didn't. Obviously, using Chinook, you can use it as a tiebreaker, get more lives than them, and then win instantly at round 40. Which, yes, it's somewhat relevant, but you have to realise that most games, although they do go to late game, aren't going to go that far. Scaling happens quick in battles. By round 35, only 5 rounds since you can send your first bad. Bads are like double speed, at least it feels like it. And even Moabs can take an absolute beating before actually popping. So almost no defense can survive like past round 36, 37. So realistically, you shouldn't really have games going to round 40. But of course, there's people who don't know what they're doing sometimes in battles, and if that happens and they let you go that far, you can of course abuse this to win the tiebreaker. It's somewhat relevant. Moving towers might end up being relevant, but we'll have to see. I don't have that much faith in it being a super important ability. The only thing I could see is Special Operations maybe surprising us, because to be fair, that Marine is really powerful. It's just a really long cooldown on that ability. I don't know if there's anything that might be good in battles that can help reduce the cooldown. I don't know, maybe Energizer will be good in battles, but I'm not sure yet. So, yeah, I don't have much faith in Heli overall. I think you would only use it for Downdraft as a quick way to save yourself against ceramics, or you would use it for Apache as just general global damage that can see camo and pop lead. If you're not using it for either of those two things, it's probably not doing too well, and generally I think in Battles 2 the name of the game is being able to use as many of your upgrades as possible for, like, useful things in multiple situations. I think that's why Sniper's so good right now. Sniper top path is amazing Moab stun, and also with Cripple Moab can increase the damage the bad takes, so you can actually break bads for quite a while. The middle path is amazing for income and just dealing with balloons, and takes Alchemist buffs really well. And the bottom path is good for just general DPS with no other strings attached, with its much faster fire rate, which means that all 3 paths of the Sniper are useful and have multiple relevant upgrades and allow it to see the entire screen, and allow it to pop camo and allow it to pop lead. Whereas other towers, like I mentioned, like the Heli, while they technically have things that make them super good, like Apache, and as I mentioned, what are you going to use besides Apache? You're not going to use middle path realistically, and you're not going to use bottom path realistically, so you're not really getting much use out of the Heli for that reason. Anyway, moving up to D tier, this one is actually only occupied by a single tower, the Buccaneer. The Buccaneer is in a weird place in battles. It was the case in Battles 1 as well, but I think it's even more the case now that almost everyone picked the Buccaneer as one of their first towers to go with. It kind of makes sense. In BTD 6, the Buccaneer is some of the best early game defense, especially with Grape Shot. It just seems to deal with almost everything that comes at you. But that's in BTD 6. In battles, of course, you get sent really tightly clumped balloons, and you'll quickly be surprised to see that the boat actually can't deal with it. In fact, there have been a couple instances of me actually literally killing my opponent on like round 3 because they were trying to start with boat. Yeah, it's kind of surprising. It's a bit of a shock to a lot of newer players seeing how badly boat defends early game in battles. So that makes it more of a mid-game tower. Which, again, that's the same problem as Ace. It's like, okay, it's nice that it's good in the mid-game, of course. It is very powerful when you get Great Shot up and Double Shot and stuff like that. It does take alch buffs really, really well. 310 boat is amazing with alch buffs. That can melt a lot of group balloons, it can melt a lot of low-tier Moabs. But the problem is, what else does it do? It can make you money with merchantmen, but unless you're running it with marketplaces with farms, then it's not going to make you more money than other options. And marketplaces with farms, well, you're already running farms, do you really need the merchantmen? You see where that's kind of going. Unless Trade Empire buffing your, like, flavored trades is actually, like, a really good plan that you have, and it's actually going to be a great defense, I don't really see it. And then that only leaves its late game, which obviously it's not really made for late game. Its bottom path basically just makes money and isn't great for damage. Its middle path does deal decent damage, and does have an insta-kill ability on Zongs, DDTs, anything like that. But it's also an ability with a long enough cooldown that you can't just rely on pirates to deal with everything. It's only really something you can place to surprise your opponent and be like, oh, they sent a fortified Zong? Haha, surprise, I have a pirate lord. But then once you have that pirate lord already placed down and your opponent knows you have him, well then, it's not going to be very useful then, because, you know, your opponent knows you're going to do that. So they're only going to send you a rush with multiple targets that you can't all get with Pirate Lord, and then, well, you die. So that really only leaves top path. And in fairness, Carrier Flagship is really, really good, really cheap, just cost-efficient damage all across the screen. I didn't actually realise that it got changed at one point so that the darts from the planes actually pop leads. As well as that, the bottom path also increases the pierce of every single projectile from the aircraft carrier. So I always thought the middle path was the better cross path, and while it is still powerful, with bottom path you can get camera detection and increased pierce on all the plane darts, and the plane darts are what deals most of the damage with the carrier flagship. So yeah, you will get a very good all-rounder tower that can see the whole screen, pop camos, pop leads, and also has the nice little extra of buffing all water-based towers and aces on the screen for you. Now, that buff is probably not going to be very, very relevant. Already we've talked about how bad it looks like Ace is going to be, but still, it's a nice little extra. Flagship is the only reason that the boat doesn't find itself in E tier. Flagship does seem like it could be a really, really big thing that could really try and save this tower from becoming completely irrelevant in the late game. But then, Flagship's kind of all it has. It feels like it can't really build to any real game-winning plan. And that would be fine if it could synergize super well with some other tower that can be your ultimate late game. But I don't know if it does have a tower like that it would synergize really well with. So, I think that I could nudge it up once Brickle gets added to battles, but that's probably a while away. And until Brickle gets added and we can buff the attack speed of water monkeys with their ability, I think that I'm quite confident saying that boat is a D tier tower.